From ImpactAlpha, it's This Week in Impact, where we bring you some of the most interesting impact investing stories of the week. It's Friday, July 18th. I'm Brian Walsh, and I'm joined this week by not one, but two of my ImpactAlpha colleagues. I'll first discuss with editor Amy Cortese her scoop this week on how nearly $3 billion in Biden-era climate financing, thought to be frozen in legal limbo, actually made it past the Trump administration's freeze. Plus, I'll talk with Kenya-based reporter Lucy Ngige about two stories she covered for us. How nature-based carbon removal process biochar is having a moment. And finally, how global superstar Rihanna is investing in women-led ventures in Africa via her Nairobi-based investment fund Gather Ventures. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Okay, first up I have Amy Cortese. Welcome back to the podcast, Amy. How are you?
Good, Brian. Good to be back.
All right, well, you had a big scoop for us this week about how nearly $3 billion out of a total $20 billion in federal climate financing thought to be frozen in legal limbo by the Trump administration actually made it out the door and into the accounts of some large asset managers. Help us set the scene here.
Sure. So we've been covering this program. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It was part of the Biden era Inflation Reduction Act. We've been covering this for a while. It was meant to set up a green lending network across the country. You can kind of think of it as a distributed green bank. 20 billion of those funds have been frozen, or so we thought, in accounts at Citibank. Well, what we learned, and I worked on this with my colleague David Bank, we learned that nearly 3 billion, 2.65 billion, was actually distributed to four of some of the largest private equity and buyout firms in the world.
So tell us about who received this funding.
Yeah, so Brookfield Asset Management, Apollo Global, and Energy Capital Partners are three of the biggest private equity buyout funds in the world. There's a fourth private equity firm that we have not sussed out the name of yet, but together these four have at least $2 trillion in assets under management. So that's kind of surprising because when you think about the mission and the goal of this greenhouse gas reduction program, it was really to get funding out the door for small scale community projects like, energy building retrofits and community solar and EV charging in communities across the nation with an emphasis actually on low income and rural communities. So the fact that so much of that money is frozen and yet what got out goes to some of these like super large private equity firms is an interesting twist in this whole saga that we've been covering.
Yeah, because there is some irony there, too, because Apollo, for instance, has connections to the Trump administration. One of their officials was thought to be in the running to be Trump's Treasury Secretary. And then Brookfield, of course, had their vice chair recently become the Prime Minister of Canada. So these are very big, connected, behemoth fund managers here.
Yes, and perhaps, and we don't know, but perhaps one reason why this has sort of flown under the radar and has not attracted the same scrutiny and pushback from the EPA, which administers the program, and the Trump administration.
All right, so how did this all come about?
Yeah, so as I said, David and I have been following this pretty closely. We heard from a source that some of these funds had indeed gotten out and to some private equity firms. So we were reading the semi-annual report published by the Coalition for Green Capital, which is one of the awardees of this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It's a network of green banks. In their annual report, they mention that 2.65 billion was dispersed by them to four what they call strategic dedicated financial partnership vehicles. So we were intrigued. We did learn the identities of them. CGC has not disclosed the identity, but when we did speak with the coalition, they did confirm that these four private equity firms do have the funds, and they had actually put out a request for proposals back in the fall. So the whole thing about the Coalition for Green Capital, they took a different approach from some of the other awardees. We've written a lot about Beth Bafford and Climate United. The other one is Power Forward Communities. Coalition for Green Capital always sort of had this go big strategy. So they had put out an RFP in the fall looking for deep pocketed financial players that could help get this money out the door and amplify their impact. And one of the key provisions of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was that for every dollar of federal funding through these awardees, it was supposed to crowd in another $7 in private capital. So CGC was thinking, like, with the the capacity and the connections of some of these big firms, they could get the money out the door faster and have more impact. Well, it turns out that was very prescient, because right after the Trump administration moved into the White House, it was about a month later, the EPA, Trump's EPA Chief Lee Zeldin, froze all of the funds that had gone out to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And that's been part of their broader attack on anything, left over from the Biden administration's green agenda.
Now, the money that has gone to these private equity firms, these big asset managers, was intended to mobilize additional private capital. The thinking being that since they have all the connections to capital providers and the kind of investment management chops, that they would be well positioned to bringing in additional dollars. Do we have any insight into how much or whether any additional private capital has been mobilized to this area?
Yeah, Brian, the short answer is no. From what we understand, the first deal from these four vehicles could be announced very shortly. Richard Kaufman at CGC told us within the next few months. So as of yet, the big asset management firms holding on to this money they all declined to comment on the record. We don't know that much yet about their different vehicles and the strategies. Most of them are likely private credit, but we understand there's some private equity mixed in there as well. So we don't know that much yet about the strategies, and there have not been any deals announced yet. So it's unclear how they will facilitate that crowding in part of the equation, or whether by having the funds, maybe they co-invest alongside of that. There are a number of ways that could happen.
All right. Well, we'll be looking forward to your continued reporting on this and following this beat as this story continues to play out in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. You can read Amy and David's scoop on the Coalition for Green Capital's Green Bank Funds on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. For now, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'll talk with Lucy Ngige about how nature-based carbon removal process biochar is having a moment. I'm now joined by Impact Alpha reporter Lucy Ngige. Lucy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Brian. I'm happy to be back.
Now, Lucy, you wrote two stories this week, one about biochar and the other about Rihanna. Let's start with your story about biochar, a nature-based carbon removal process that I must confess I only first learned about via your story. Why is biochar having a moment?
So, Brian, I think biochar is gaining traction and is hot right now because it's a nature-based carbon removal solution, and the market is also projected to hit $3 billion this year.
So carbon removal is hot right now because a lot of climate investors are realizing that they just all the decarbonation that they can do through renewable energy and other decarbonization projects can't scale up fast enough. And so we need to actually do things like remove carbon from the atmosphere. And this is one of those high quality, low-cost processes for removing carbon.
Exactly. And the cost effectiveness bit of it is also crucial, because biochar simply just locks carbon into the soil. And I think that is one of the reasons why it's really hot right now.
All right, so it locks carbon into the soil. Talk me through that process. How does biochar actually work?
So, biochar is created from simply burning biomass, and biomass can be, organic waste. For instance, rice husks or vegetable waste. So that process is taken through a process called pyrolysis, to convert that organic waste into biochar. And biochar in itself, as a fertilizer, it's really effective in improving yields. In some cases, it's been proven to outperform synthetic alternatives.
Okay, so tell us about how biochar has been commercialized in this process, and how does it actually work in the supply chain of farmers?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, biochar is becoming an alternative to synthetics because it's natural, and in some cases it's cheaper, particularly in the case of Safi Organics, which we'll talk about later. But essentially, the entire biochar process is able to commercialize waste that previously, had no value. So, for instance, if you take vegetable waste, most of the times, it's just maybe thrown in landfills, or it's discarded. It has little commercial value. So the biochar industry is effectively and essentially, collecting all this waste and helping to derive value from it.
Now, you wrote about Africa Climate Ventures that's getting involved in biochar industry. Tell us about them and what you learned.
So Africa Climate Ventures is, first of all, an early stage investor in climate solutions. It's also a venture studio builder, and that essentially is, it seeds companies in-house, grows them, takes them past the early stage, and then allows them to be spin-off and standalone companies. So Africa Climate Ventures was initially considering launching its own biochar venture in-house, taking into account the market potential for biochar, and how other investors in the space are turning to biochar. So Africa Climate Ventures was in the process of launching its own biochar startup in-house until it came across Kenya's Safi Organics, which is a startup that has been running for a decade. It has been profitable on its own for over 7 years. And I think that is one of the reasons why it made sense for Africa Climate Ventures to then come in and back Safi Organics.
So that's really interesting. I like this story that Africa Climate Ventures was trying to spin up its own business in the biochar space, but then they came across Safi Organics and they're like, wait a minute, these guys know what they're doing. Let's back them and help scale their efforts. So, what have they done to invest in Safi?
So when ACV, I'll call them ACV. So when ACV came into the picture, they invested around 750,000 into Safi, acquired 30% of the company, and all this was to help Safi expand its production facilities.
And tell me more about the business model of Safi.
So Safi essentially does a lot of its biochar production in-house. And what it does is, because it's based in one of Kenya's largest rice growing regions, there is an abundance of the raw materials, and the raw materials being rice husks. Because, when rice goes through the rice processing process, there's a lot of rice husks which are left behind after the entire process, which didn't have a lot of commercial value before Safi Organics came into the picture. So what Safi does is, because it's based in this region, it's able to access raw materials easily. It works with a lot of youth groups to do the sourcing. And so it acquires these rice husks, and this is essentially the main raw material as biomass, which is then converted into biochar through pyrolysis.
So the story is interesting because it hits on a lot of themes that ImpactAlpha covers. So first, you start with the international market for carbon credits, and the high quality credits for biochar help then subsidize the production of this fertilizer for farmers that generally can help lower their input costs. But then it also, in the production of this biochar, it actually helps empower local youth and local business leaders who make and source the biochar and process it themselves.
Exactly. I like the fact that, through this biochar, Safi is able to generate carbon credits. It's already secured buyers through, one example is Klarna, the Swedish bank. And so proceeds of these carbon credits are used to, one, subsidize fertilizer prices for Kenyan farmers. And the other thing is, these proceeds are used to secure loans that, will help equip these youth groups with certified pyrolysis units. So right now they're using basic artisanal kilns, but they need certified pyrolysis units, so that they can generate quality carbon credits themselves. So it's interesting to see how the chain that is forming, from initial carbon removal of the biochar itself.
All right. Well, super interesting. Thanks for educating me on biochar and this super interesting company, Safi Organics, and the Africa Climate Ventures. You can read Lucy's piece on biochar on impactalpha.com. There's also a link for it in our show notes. For now, let's take one more quick break. When we come back, she's not the only girl in the world. How singer, entrepreneur, cultural icon Rihanna is investing in women via her Gather Ventures Impact Fund. Lucy, your other story this week was about superstar Rihanna, the singer, actor, fashion and beauty business tycoon, philanthropist, and now impact investor. Tell us about that.
So Rihanna has been running the Clara Lionel Foundation since 2012, and it's mostly been a grant provider for education and climate solutions in the Caribbean. The foundation is now expanding its reach. It's coming into Africa, but this time it's seeding its own fund called Gather Ventures. And Gather essentially will not just be a grant provider. It will expand the capital. It will expand the instruments with which it uses to deploy capital. So that means we're seeing this philanthropy. Essentially, we're seeing this philanthropy go beyond traditional grant making to start offering debt, equity, convertible notes, and bridge financing for the entrepreneurs it serves.
So you had one of the first media interviews with Gather Ventures. Tell us what you learned about their goals and ambitions.
I had a great chat with Jo Opot, who is directing Gather Ventures right now. And my primary takeaway from her is how Gather Ventures essentially comes to the table to listen to what an entrepreneur needs. So Jo Opot shared with me that most of the times the entrepreneurs she interacts with have to deal with a certain mismatch in capital. So for example, an entrepreneur might be at the point where they require a working capital loan, but the only type of capital that they're able to access is equity, for instance. And so what happens is, an entrepreneur ends up taking capital that is not really suited for them, but is what is available. So what Gather Ventures is doing is meeting these entrepreneurs and providing them with the right type of capital, or the type of capital that they feel is necessary at that point of growth of where they at the time.
So why did you get a sense for why Rihanna launched Gather Ventures as an impact investing project?
I think it points to their responsiveness and their willingness to listen to what an entrepreneur actually needs. So we know a lot of philanthropies can stick to traditional grant making, but grant capital sort of limits what an organization or an enterprise is able to do. So I feel like they sort of shifted their strategy in response to what an emerging market entrepreneur will need.
So can you tell us some examples about some of the entrepreneurs and the enterprises that they've backed so far through Gather Ventures?
Sure. I really like their pool of investees. So one, we have Giraffe Bioenergy, which is based in Kenya. And what it does is it produces bioethanol, and it sources feedstock, which is cassava, from female farmers in the country. The other one is Mobility for Africa, which is based in Zimbabwe. And they provide electric tricycles for rural communities with a strong focus on women. They also financed women-owned microprocessors, which, as its name suggests, provides microprocessing services for women in the mango value chain in Kenya.
Now, a big theme that ImpactAlpha has been covering recently has been the ownership economy. And I understand that Gather Ventures also has a focus on ownership for the entrepreneurs that they back. Tell us about that.
Ownership is very important to me. And one thing I noticed with Gather Ventures is they also deploy alternative pools of capital to help women acquire productive assets. So for instance, with debt or with convertible notes, these female entrepreneurs are able to purchase drying equipment or logistics assets. And these are assets that most of the time, you're not able to access with just grants. So that was also another reason for why they're trying to move away from traditional grant making. It's to chart a pathway for female entrepreneurs to become asset owners.
And if there's one thing Rihanna knows about, it's how to be a female entrepreneur. She is one of the wealthiest and best-selling musicians of all times, and is considered to be on the Forbes billionaire list. So she knows how to run a business.
Exactly.
All right, you can read Lucy's article about Rihanna's Gather Ventures on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of This Week in Impact. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
And thank you all for listening. This Week in Impact is going to take a 2-week summer break. We'll have special episodes from other shows in your feed in the meantime, and we'll see you back here on August 8th. This Week in Impact is a production of ImpactAlpha and part of the ImpactAlpha podcast network. Smart conversations by and for impact investing professionals. For exclusive stories and insights about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join thousands of other agents of impact by subscribing. Just go to ImpactAlpha.com/subscribe for full access. Thanks as always to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For Lucy Ngige and Amy Cortese, I'm Brian Walsh, Managing Director of the impact advisory firm Human Nature. We'll see you in August for more Impact.